Well, it's interesting you're talking about the British experience. I find it fascinating that sometimes countries don't learn from their own experience, right? Their own history. Now, you're familiar with the Macartney Embassy, or why does it called embassy? It's a delegation, right? It's a Macartney delegation that
Yeah,
went to China during the Qing Dynasty, right? So
yeah,
I mean, that itself, the embassy itself, the Macartney Embassy itself, could be a
yeah,
totally separate target. But one of the things that they went there to
yeah,
celebrate the Qianlong Huangdi Qianlong's birthday, 60th birthday.
yeah,
So now their whole purpose was actually to have a trade talk with the
mm,
Qing dynasty, which
mm,
wasn't successful, but separate topic. But one of the things they brought with them to this huge delegation, lots of gift. One of them is a carriage, right? So they brought a carriage to Qianlong, and what my understanding, the reason is that they think that their carriage is more advanced compared to Qianlong's own
mm,
carriage. It's not as bumpy. It's more smooth ride because the way
mm,
they design the wheels and there's a lot of
mm,
science in there. Okay,
mm,
Qianlong didn't even get to see it. Now the reason is the people who are working for Qianlong, they didn't want to upset him because the carriage was designed in a way that the driver was sitting in front of the emperor with his butt facing the emperor. Now that is regarded as disrespectful. And so that
mm,
alone was enough for the people around Qianlong to say, okay, we don't even want to show this to Qianlong. I'm thinking if I were Qianlong, of course, Qianlong has the list of the gift. I would be interested. Okay, you bring
yeah,
me a carriage. What's so special about
mm,
this carriage? Let me try it on, right? But he
mm,
clearly wasn't interested. Maybe his people told him, okay, the
mm,
driver's face, butt is facing your face or
mm.
something. That was enough for him. They're making the same mistake here, I think.
Yeah.
They don't even curious about what is going on here. Don't you think?
The Macartney mission is a fascinating story, and I should say you're being very kind to McCartney and the British. If you read the story of it, I mean, one of the problems with that whole deputation is that McCartney behaved in the most incredibly arrogant way,
Okay.
and went out of his way to be as offensive to the emperor as he possibly could. And the Chinese, who actually had been quite willing to receive this embassy in Beijing. I mean, the emperor had come and he took great interest in what it was doing. They became incredibly offended, and it all went horribly wrong. But anyway, we won't get into the details of this
Yeah.
because fundamentally, you are absolutely correct. I mean, the failure of China, of the Qing dynasty, which of course is not exactly the same as China, but
Hmm.
the Qing dynasty um, to relate to the world, to
Yeah.
engage with the world, the outside world at that time. Um, the desire to retreat into China itself, which, by the way, at that time was a very rich country. It's a time of great economic prosperity and stability. Turned out to be a catastrophic mistake, and it meant that China fell behind in key industrial and manufacturing technologies, some of which it had pioneered itself.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a long story here, for example, about porcelain production,
Yeah.
because porcelain being something that I take a great interest in. But uh, um, mass production technology, the whole concept of production lines was basically developed in, was it Tsingtahhe, the city where they make the porcelain, wherever it
Hmm.
was. But the Chinese actually did that, and they did this massive export of porcelain to Europe in the 16th, 17th centuries. The Europeans gradually learned from that. They got some ideas of how the Chinese were doing it. Some of these ideas then got developed in Europe. And, the Chinese pioneered some of these techniques, but they let themselves be left behind because they just couldn't bring themselves to understand that others might do it better. And when they did start to understand it, rather than face up to the fact the Qing dynasty brought the shutters down, they didn't want to see it because they felt that it would endanger them in some kind of way. Well, it's exactly the same. The West is making exactly the same mistake. We have had 3, 4, 500 years of economic and technological dominance. That is passing. We can't bring ourselves in the West to accept that fact, that reality. So rather than do that, we're bringing the shutters down, and we're telling ourselves all sorts of absurd things, that the Chinese are only able to do it because they're stealing our ideas, they're stealing our technology, they're engaging in overcapacity, their economy is operated in different ways from the way that our economy is operating, which, by the way, is true. But then that's not something to criticize the Chinese for. If their economy works better than ours, then we should learn from that, not shut our doors to it. But anyway, that's the reaction. It is to retreat rather than to engage, and it is a disastrous mistake.
Yeah, the Macartney embassy or mission is it interesting. It's well studied in China because it's regarded as a missed sign. There are all kinds of signs from that visit that the emperor should pick up. For example, they also brought a globe, right? Where they put the British flag over the globe, which people were saying, well, you should think as an emperor, you should think, okay, they put a flag over the place. Are they also interested in putting flag in China, right? So you should get that thinking, get started to think about it.
That is very interesting. You know, it would be quite interesting to compare British accounts of the Macartney Embassy and studies of it with Chinese ones, because clearly there are great differences in perspective. I mean, I read books about this in Britain, by the way. And as I said, I mean, the one thing that stands out immediately is this enormous resentment that Macartney had of the Chinese officials he was dealing with. And he was going out of his way to be, I don't think he thought of himself as being rude, but he wasn't compromising. He wasn't bending in any conceivable way to Chinese concerns and sensibilities. So, there was a major degree of cultural arrogance on that side as well, that, you know, the Chinese should treat him with a kind of deference that, you know, no one in China you know, would extend to anyone in a similar position to the one that Macartney occupied.
Yeah. And China also conclusion was that this happened like about, I think, 40, 50 years before the Opium War. So
right.
they see the relationship, the linkage, because if you look at what after the Opium War, they agreed that what the British get is pretty much what they asked during the Macartney embassy, you know, their visit. So the people see that as a like a prelude to the Opium War, that the British tried to get something, they couldn't get it peacefully, then they used war to get it. That's how
They used war to get it, but of course, in those 50 years, Britain had expanded significantly, and China to a lesser extent. The great paradox or tragedy, if you like, about the Macartney era, the Macartney mission, is, of course, if China had opened up and had engaged in trade with Britain in the 1790s, it would have done so from a position of far greater advantage. In fact, one of the reasons why there was an opium war at all, and, you know, they didn't just start with the 1840s, but it continued in the 1860s and all of this, is because despite all of the openings that did take place, China consistently ran a trade surplus with Britain. The Chinese remained more successful in making certain things than the British were. And the British became very concerned about this because you weren't supposed to run trade surpluses with Britain. So they said, how are we going to rectify this? We're going to do it by forcing the Chinese to buy opium. Now, it's a terrible thing. And of course, at that point, they had the technological and military power to force that on China, which in the 1790s they didn't have.
Yeah. But don't you think we're in a similar situation? There is also trade surplus, you know, have been running for years, which Donald Trump wanted to ratify, right? He wanted that's when the trade war started. So this trade deficit thing seems to come back again, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, does that mean the U.S. now? Of course, it's against the U.S., but also with Western countries in general. Is eventually U.S. is going to do the thing that the British did, using a war, some kind of a way to force China? Do you think that's what's going on?
Well, I think that is what some people in the US are thinking, that this is this Chinese colossus. The only way it can be brought down to a certain level is by basically bullying it and forcing it into adapting itself to Western needs. Nobody ever looks at this in a different way, which is a much more sensible way, which is to do what Xi Jinping constantly, and I think other Chinese officials constantly suggest, which is go for a win-win type of situation, which you can do cooperatively. As a matter of fact, a point which maybe many people are not aware of, but China structurally tends to have a surplus in its external trade. I mean, this has always been true. It was true in the 18th century. It was true in the 19th century. It was true, after China's big opening in the 20th century, because that is the nature of the Chinese economy. There was, during the period of China's humiliation, I don't know how well it's known, but the British effectively gained control of the Chinese customs service. I mean, the man who was running the Chinese customs service was a Briton, and he only recruited Europeans to act as China's customs officers. Now, he was an unusual man because despite the fact that his loyalties were overwhelmingly towards Britain, and he took a very long time to even learn Chinese, he eventually developed a genuine love for China, which is most unusual, but you can read about. But he once actually put it very well. Look, China will always run a trade surplus. And why wouldn't it? Because Chinese people are very productive and they produce the three best products in the world. They produce the best cloth, which is silk, the best food, which is rice, and the best drink, which is tea. Why should they be forced to accept inferior things? Now, of course, he was simplifying, but he was a person who understood the trade system, the trade relationship between China and the West. Now, the fact is the Chinese want to sell what they make, and there's no reason why one can't buy those things. And it's a fundamental mistake to think that because one country runs a surplus, that means that that's a zero-sum game, and that you have to, force them into some kind of a deficit. You can always find ways to balance things out. One way, for example, is to integrate, to work with the Chinese to build financial systems, mechanisms that will help the trade flows to maintain themselves. But it makes no sense to prevent yourself obtaining the better products that China produces simply because they run a trade surplus. It is illogical. It shows economic ignorance to think that.
Yeah, and speaking of win-win, both Thailand and Turkey are interested in joining BRICS, which I find interesting, because Thailand is an ASEAN country. So Thailand is the first one, I guess, to want to join BRICS, which means potentially all the ASEAN countries might eventually join BRICS. And Turkey is even more interesting because Turkey is a NATO country, and now Turkey has tried many years to join EU, right? But it has not been successful. So is Turkey sending a message? Okay, I'm giving up on EU. I'm joining BRICS. Is that what it is?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is partly that, but I think that there's a growing sense in Turkey, and Turkey's a country that I know quite well. I haven't been there for a very long time, but it's very close to Greece. Greece and Turkey are, and I'm Greek myself, so I have had historic connections with Turkey. Turkey is a country that in so many ways fits better within a kind of Eurasian trading system than it does within a European one. In a European one, the Turks will always be looked down upon and seen as inferiors. In a Eurasian system, they will be accepted as full equal partners. And if you look at their history and their trade flows, and the fact that all their most important neighbors, Iran, Russia, obviously, are part of the BRICS already, it makes a great deal of sense. And there are more and more people in Turkey who are arguing for this. And importantly, they're not necessarily from Erdogan's party. On the contrary, many of them are amongst Erdogan's opponents. It's a fairly wide constituency in Turkey, which says that we should seek a relationship with, a Eurasian relationship with Turkey, with Iran, with Russia, above all with China. I remember the very last time I was in Turkey, which is long ago, I remember being on the west coast of Turkey, and the local guide proudly said to me, "This road which you're on used to be the Silk Road. It takes us all the way to China." Actually, he was wrong. But anyway, I mean, it's you can understand how that there is that sense that Turkey is, it fits in trade terms, and I have to say in cultural terms, much better into this system than it does into the Western and European one.
Now, is it the main reason that it's not letting in the EU is racist? They just don't see Turkey as European. Is that the main reason?
Of course it is. There's no other. that is the overwhelming, straightforward reason. I mean, they come up with all kinds of other reasons, human rights violations and all that. I'm not saying that there haven't been some problems like that in Turkey in the past, but there have been times when it's been a flourishing democracy, what they would call a flourishing democracy, and it's still not been included. But of course, it's racism. There's no. That is the straightforward reason. And I think the Turks themselves have come to understand it.
Okay.